Hey, welcome back to another episode of Get Real with Stacie and Kendra. How are you today, Kendra?
I'm good. It's Friday. Um, we heard a thing this morning that on the way to school that told the kids, it's like, oh, you've only got 2 days till Mother's Day to get your cards and your gifts. And they were like,
Oh,
ooh. I was like, yeah,
good
girls, two
reminder.
days.
I know. This morning on the way to school, I couldn't find my sunglasses. So I did drop a little hint that a backup pair of sunglasses would be an excellent Mother's Day because I know that they're thinking about that. And also blank stare. So,
You're like, well, I guess I should just go ahead and Amazon myself something.
yeah, I mean, let's just do it. I did. I bought myself new sheets recently and new towels, and that was my Mother's Day gift. But I did have to check the bank statement yesterday, and I did notice there were a couple of charges that I was not aware of. So that's kind of
Mm.
there may be something under the Mother's Day tree for me. I don't know.
Well, I did my own Mother's Day. I bought myself a loom box for Mother's
I
Day.
want one. I love it. Do you love it?
I do. And really, my main thing was I wanted to get it to try for my daughter's eczema to
Yeah.
see if it would help because she has a couple patches on her knees and short season. But I've been using it. And I love it. I
Oh,
really, it's whether it's placebo or actual, I don't know, but joints, it really helps my joints.
that red light therapy.
Yeah.
So,
Mhm.
yeah, I think there's so many benefits to red light therapy. I know we talked about that in one of our episodes. We talked about detoxification and how to support detox pathways, but the red light therapy has so many benefits. And you and I both have infrared saunas.
Mhm.
But as it gets warmer, like the last thing I want to do is sit in my sauna. So that's a great winter activity, but it's harder for me to do in the summer.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So I love the red light therapy. So we're going to have to talk about that. But that actually is a really good segue into what we are going to talk about today, which is the symptoms of inflammation in your body. And, you know, primarily people who work with me come to me because they have symptoms of inflammation and they want to reduce the inflammation. Now, a lot of times they don't know that what they have going on is inflammation, right? Like they come to me because they have a random group of symptoms. Maybe they have a diagnosis, but this random group of symptoms is impacting their lives. They don't feel good, and nothing that they have done has helped yet. So that's when they come to me for diet. So I thought today, let's really talk about what is inflammation? Like, what are those symptoms that we're looking for that would say, okay, this is inflammation?
Yeah, so for me personally, I had no idea what inflammation was. I'd never heard a doctor use the word inflammation. I'm not sure I still have heard a
Right.
doctor use inflammation. I struggled with constipation and abdominal pain for 10 years and went through multitudes of doctors and tests, and no one could help me. And I cut out gluten and instantly was better.
Interesting.
Um, but again, when I talked to my doctor, no one mentioned that this could have caused gut inflammation, that it really, I had the symptoms. They all wanted to talk about the symptoms, but what was causing it? And this even has gone down the line of when I had diagnosed with osteoarthritis.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it was, well, here's this medication you can take to help your symptom. But I was like, but what is causing me to have this problem? Again, nothing. We don't know. It's generally we don't know. Same with cancer. Like all these things, when I then did my own research, found the common denominator is inflammation, specifically like gut inflammation.
Mm-hmm.
So all these things sort of trickle down. And I think you posted a great thing this morning in your stories about how our healthcare system isn't designed to fix those things until they've gotten so bad that you are chronically debilitatingly ill and need treatment, in a hospital.
Right.
Whereas if we had started it when you had the first little like symptom, then we'd be dealing with a different thing. So I think the biggest problem for people is doctors aren't telling you that it's inflammation. So how do people know? What are the symptoms of inflammation? How do we know, like, hey, is this something I can address now instead of when I'm bedridden?
Right. Well, that's the interesting thing, just talking about what are the symptoms, how do you know? A lot of times when I have a strategy call with somebody, when I am talking to them about their options for working with me, I they usually fill out a symptom survey. They tell me about the severity and the frequency of any kind of symptoms they're having. What they don't realize is that all of those symptoms are symptoms of inflammation. And so when I tell them, okay, so what we have going on here is inflammation, it's like, that's exactly right. Yes, I'm inflamed. Like they can feel it. And when they think about that, it's like, yes, my whole body feels inflamed. And so I liken it to, I always explain the inflammation is just kind of a forest fire in your body that's caused by a lot of different things. And we'll talk about that, but it's like you just are in flames. You have this forest fire that has gotten out of control. So a lot of times it could be just a combination of those symptoms. It could be anything from GI issues to headaches to depression and anxiety. Those are symptoms of inflammation. Joint aches and pains, absolutely. Skin conditions like eczema, like psoriasis, rosacea, all of those are inflammatory. But then when we go into the diagnosis category, when we get to like, okay, well, what have we learned? What have you learned from going to the doctor? If you have a diagnosis and it ends with the word itis, that means inflammation. So we're talking about arthritis, diverticulitis, colitis, even things like meningitis, hepatitis, myocarditis, all of these mean inflammation. And so oftentimes, you're getting this from your doctor, you're getting that diagnosis, but what you're not getting in conventional medical therapy is like a solution. I mean, any kind of like, any of these inflammatory conditions can then lead to autoimmune diseases. And there's no, what I would consider cure for an autoimmune disease in the conventional health world.
Right. They give you an NSAID or a steroid and say, come back when it flares back up again, which inevitably is going to happen because we're not told to stop eating the things or doing the things that are causing the inflammation in our body. Like people just keep going down eating the same thing, never being even aware that that could be a very large factor in what's happening, especially if it's like leaky gut. Like, a few years ago, leaky gut was the big thing, but I don't think anybody really understood what that meant or that they could fix it.
Right.
As a person, like they could fix their leaky gut. It was just like, well, I've got leaky gut caused this, like whatever leaky gut is. It's like the unicorn, you're like, I don't know. They told me I have leaky gut.
Right. I know. Well, and any of those symptoms, like any of those manifestations of inflammation, any of the itises or any of just the symptoms, like I said, if you have diarrhea or constipation, that's inflammation. Those things are red flags. That is like the warning sign that your body is throwing up, right? It's literally like, okay, here's a red flag for you because I'm trying to tell you that like things are not right. Basically, inflammation is a natural process that your body uses in order to heal itself. So if it's injured or if it's attacked, it's going to use inflammation as a protective mechanism. It's what helps you form a scab or heal a wound, but it's when that gets out of control that it's a problem. And so when you have that and it doesn't stop, you've got all of these red flags popping up. And that's what leads to autoimmunity. It's what leads to any of those itises. And again, there's not a really good path for treatment in the conventional world. You're mostly looking at steroids or immunosuppressants, and then you're getting all the side effects of those, which are not great. If you've watched TV, which I don't do a lot of unless I'm on vacation, and I turn on the TV and I'm like, wow, the pharmaceuticals out there would be really scary. I mean, hearing all of the side effects of some of those pharmaceuticals, like the side effects are worse than the problem itself. So they're not addressing the inflammation, they're merely helping with symptoms. And that's what you get in the conventional world.
And so does diabetes fall into that category as well?
Yeah, I mean, diabetes, heart disease, so the major chronic diseases are all driven by inflammation, and diabetes is, so your blood sugar can be a reflection of inflammation. In fact, like an unknown root or a tooth issue, like if you need a root canal and you don't know it and you have a dental infection, that's a huge driver of your blood sugar because you've got that infection going on, and then your blood sugar is out of control. Sometimes we don't even know that that's going on. We just think we have high blood sugar, but really that inflammation from the infection is triggering the blood sugar. And so I do think in some cases that is what puts us into diabetes, but no, I mean, diabetes is that manifestation of inflammation. It is an inflammatory disease, just like all of the itises, just like heart disease, and cancer even. There's definitely an inflammatory component to cancer, which is why when we think about natural approaches to cancer prevention, at minimum, you've probably heard eat your fruits and vegetables because they help to fight inflammation, right? They have antioxidants. There's a lot of benefits there, but yeah, all of those are inflammatory, and people just don't understand that is at the root because they're not hearing that at the doctor's office.
Right. So it's kind of scary because somebody doesn't even, basically when someone's coming to you, a lot of your clients, I'm sure, are because modern medicine or conventional medicine has failed them. Like they've tried all these things and it's still not working, or they're still having the problem because, the doctors, like, I'm just baffled by the fact that they don't know what to do beyond prescribing, well, now you've got to take insulin, or you've got to, take this steroid or this anti-inflammatory pill to help you, when really everything else, and then it's just like that roller coaster that's out of control. And and then you're just in it. You're in it to just progressively get worse and worse and worse.
Yeah. And, every once in a while, I will say, I mean, it really will depend on your doctor. It will depend on the specialist. If you're going to like a rheumatologist, they are probably going to run labs for inflammation. They're probably going to look at something called C-reactive protein, which is a marker of inflammation. I mean, they're probably going to run some labs. If they don't, then I would go find one who does. There are a few labs that give us indication of inflammation, and just sometimes looking at the big picture of, blood sugar and thyroid and, all of those different labs that will give you a picture of inflammation, especially if you're symptomatic. And so a lot of times what I'll tell people is take the symptom survey that you took with me. The symptom survey, again, has you rate the severity and the frequency of your symptoms in a bunch of different categories. Your fatigue level, headaches, sinus, like nasal drip, that kind of thing. Take that to your doctor, because that is how, give them that picture of this is what's going on with me beyond my labs or beyond like just being tired. That gives them the whole picture. The problem is, the way that our medical system is set up, we're not looking at the whole picture. Everybody's got like different part of the body. And so you're not thinking like, well, should I tell my heart doctor that I have sinus infections constantly? Well, there might be a connection there, right? So, or I'm just going to go to the GI doctor, but I'm not going to tell them about my other problems. So yeah, I mean, there's a ton of overlap. There are some labs that you can get tested, but I think, the biggest way to know if you have inflammation is just based on how you feel. Those symptoms are red flags. And if you're really paying attention to your body, you will know it's not normal. And I don't care what they say when you get, or as you're getting older and you're aging, that stuff just isn't necessarily normal either. We don't have to accept it.
Yeah. And that's sort of like where it is like, well, you are getting older.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I know that. And there are things that naturally happen to the body as we age. I mean, mitochondria, that's the energy powerhouse in our cells. Okay. Yeah. We're going to lose mitochondria. That is going to affect us, but there are still things that you can do to really minimize that inflammation in spite of aging. So yeah, maybe you have a few leftover symptoms here and there when you start making like health changes, and we can't control everything. That's the other piece of this.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things that trigger inflammation. Obviously, I come from a place of looking at how diet triggers inflammation, but everything that you're exposed to on a daily basis, your water, your environment, stress, sleep, all of those things factor in. And so, we can control the controllables and see improvement there.
So your symptom survey, is that the one where you go through and it gives you a number at the end, like you total it all up? I love that, because then like when you do it again, because when you're in it, it's sort of hard to see like, okay, I do feel better. I mean, you feel better, but it's like when you see the difference in the numbers like that, I'm like, why isn't everybody doing this? Like, that's such a great like tool. Even if like 2 years from now, you look back and you're like, wow, I forgot that I used to have this like right side abdominal pain and now I don't, like I love that. I love that survey.
Yeah, well, and I'm like a very results driven person. And honestly, when you're making diet changes or lifestyle changes, you need to see results pretty quickly in order to stick with something. And so when we start with a symptom survey, and then we do one 2 weeks after you start and you see the improvement, which I don't make any promises, but I would say most of my clients they could see 40 to 60% improvement in 2 weeks, maybe more. Especially if they come to me very inflamed and then they are so ready to make changes that they really like just dial it in and, follow the plan as written, they're going to see better results for sure. But yeah, you've kind of got to see that. And I do think it's helpful even after 6 or 8 weeks, because sometimes when you start feeling better, you forget how bad you felt. And then you can go back and be like, wow, I went from like 160 to 3. I mean, I've had that happen where somebody has gone from 160, which, those of you who haven't taken the survey, that probably doesn't mean anything to you, but my average client starts at about a 58 and ends up at a 12 after 6 weeks. But if you start at 160, you're feeling pretty darn bad.
Wow.
Yeah.
Holy cow, that's awesome. Like, to me, that's a more important number than the scale. It's like I want to strive for that low number of like symptoms.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Versus whatever the scale says.
100%. I mean, and a lot of times people they have multiple goals. They want to feel better, but they also want to lose weight. And it's like, okay, let's just start with feeling better. That has to be your priority, because when you feel better, you do better. When you feel better, you make better choices. You have more energy. You can move your body. You can walk. You just can do more. And
it's like that first domino, clicking it over, and then everything else falls in behind it.
Yeah, that is really why I do what I do, because I mean, I've done it myself. Like I was my first client. So I was like, wow, this is what I want to do when I grow up. I feel so much better having made these changes and, having made diet changes and lifestyle changes like that. That's what I want to do. I want to help other people feel this good.
And know that it's possible. Like,
it is.
It's not just maybe you will feel better. Okay, so did we talk about like so how does the gut, like, because it really starts there, right? Like the gut being our second brain
Yeah,
type of
or even
thing.
first, maybe.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, there's a huge gut-brain connection. So the vagus nerve connects our gut and our brain together. I mean, the vagus nerve is just like the super highway. And so I would say the gut is probably the primary brain,
So if
but
your gut's inflamed, your brain is probably inflamed.
yeah. Yeah. And so you think about anxiety, depression, some of the mood disorders that we're dealing with, that all starts in the gut. And there's some really good research I've seen. And I think, we're probably going to talk about that in one of our upcoming shows. But the gut, because there is such that strong connection between our brains, you're going to see that that inflammation in the gut is going to translate in the brain, but your gut is really your immune system. You think about the trillions of gut bacteria that you have, and it's those bacteria that make up your immune system and the fungi and the everything that's in there. Now, there are some bacteria that we have that are inflammatory. So you may have, we'll just call it bad bacteria that's inflammatory, or you may be lacking the good bacteria that actually helps your body produce, like, to fight off the invader or the infection, or whatever is triggering that inflammation. So the gut, because of that microbiome in there, that's going to determine how your body responds to inflammation. So there's a lot of research linking the gut to inflammation. And then we have that leaky gut, which, I think the best way to explain what a leaky gut is it's just like you have a porous gut lining. So you have just like little holes in the junctions of your gut. And so oftentimes what happens is we have little microscopic particles of food getting into the cell wall or through those junctions in between the cells there. When that gets into the bloodstream, that triggers inflammation. And that's when we develop the food sensitivities. And, I've worked with hundreds of clients on identifying food sensitivities and then working with their results to come up with their best foods and really put them on a diet that's going to help to reduce that inflammation and heal up that leaky gut. So when we do that, we're essentially taking out food as an inflammatory trigger. We're removing food as a source of inflammation, and then that's where you have your body wants to heal itself. Your body doesn't want to be inflamed. And so when you set it up like that, when you sort of like, okay, the diet is the foundation there, anything else you do is going to work better. So all of the other, additional nutrients, additional bacteria or probiotics, everybody wants to know, like, what probiotics should I take? It's not that simple. It's not all about probiotics. But that's part of that puzzle. But you got to remove the foods that are triggering the inflammation and let the immune system calm down to reduce that inflammation.
So will that close up the holes if you take those foods out, like when you do the eliminations? Does
Yeah.
that
So
help, or is there something else?
yeah, I mean, eventually that is what sets it up again. So your gut can heal. Let's just consider that to be like a wound that your body has that it needs to heal. And so your body wants to heal that. So it will do that. It can do that on its own, but usually I do some support for that. I mean, there are things that help to kind of heal and seal the gut lining. Zinc is one of those. We know zinc is really important in wound healing and in your immune system. So zinc is usually one of those I give, and then making sure that you're getting all of the right macronutrients and micronutrients. And so, yeah, I mean, supplementation is part of that. There is not necessarily like a protocol that I follow. A general protocol, it's usually pretty individualized, but there are some things across the board that we can do. Zinc is one of them. Making sure you're getting high quality foods is another. making sure you're getting all those nutrients and that we're replacing the things that you might be deficient in, replacing digestive enzymes, that kind of thing, just helping your digestion.
Fiber, right? Fiber, getting all that fiber in there.
Yeah. Well, if you think about, when you poop, that is a way that you're eliminating toxins from your body, right? So you're clearing stuff out, and having healthy bowel movements can be really important for reducing inflammation from that perspective. So fiber, I mean, there's some really good research on fiber and inflammation.
Well, yeah, because if I think back to when I had the chronic constipation. I'm like, how much toxins was I just not eliminating? Like they were just in there for really long periods of time.
Yeah.
Like that's so scary when you think about that. Like,
Oh, yeah.
was that the trigger for everything else later down the line? Because I was struggling with that for so long.
Well, yeah. And then you think about, there are hormones, like I think, we've talked about this, how you clear out estrogen through your bowel movements. And so then, if you're not clearing out those metabolites and you're holding on to them because you're constipated, well, that's going to throw your hormones off. And then you're going to have like hormonal issues. And I mean, there's just so many layers to it that making sure you get fiber, you get enough fiber, you get enough water and activity and those things to make sure that you're having a healthy bowel movement. If you're not having at least one good bowel movement a day, there is probably inflammation there.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And everybody feels better. We're happier.
Much happier. Much happier.
Yeah.
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 Oh.
So that's always a goal. Like I get really personal with people about their bowel movements. Everybody's like, well, I know this is TMI. I'm like, no, it's not. You can use your bowel movements to really determine if you're inflamed. That is a really great way to determine, like, do I have inflammation here? There's something called the Bristol stool scale. You can Google it or look it up, and that'll tell you, if you're having really loose, watery stools, there's some inflammation going on. Or if you're having like the bunny poops, like the really hard little poops, also some inflammation there. So we want to be somewhere in the middle, like a snake is what, or maybe just kind of like
just see.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's not always going to be perfect, people, and it will depend on what you eat, but you want to pay attention to your poop. It is not TMI for me.
No. And I joke to my kids because they're terrible flushers or historically were. And I'm like, it's okay because then at least I can see, I'm like, okay, they're doing good. They're not, it's not.
I know. I'm that
occasionally
mom.
I'm like, ooh.
Yeah. Are you feeling okay?
Yeah. And always after apple blossom, when everybody's poop is that weird blue green from the cotton candy.
Oh my gosh. I remember the first time one of my babies, it was Jacob. He went to a birthday party and had that blue-green frosting, and I was horrified. Like I had no idea that your poop would be the color of any artificial things that you eat.
Yeah.
And at least you're clearing some of that out, but just, I wonder what your insides look like when you are eating that.
Yeah.
I mean, you want to have it, you want to be able to eat your food and chew it up to the point where it's a liquid when you swallow it. And then it just has an easy time going down. That some of the roughage from the fiber, some of the roughage from fruits and vegetables, that's going to be really helpful for they're like scrub rushes, right, in the intestines. So there is benefit to that, having that scrub brush effect. But one really good visual is when we used to make pizza dough. We still make pizza, but we make it with almond flour. It's a little bit different now, but when we'd have the pizza dough just be elastic, and I couldn't wash the bowl, right? Like the bowl, it would just be like sticking in elastic all over the bowl, and I couldn't get it down, the drain. And I was thinking, like, what is this like in my body? this gluten, the gluten that is like really elasticy and stuff and makes really great bread and pizza dough, was also going into my body. And that's what it was doing. It was probably like sticking, it's hard to get off.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
don't want to eat foods that are really hard to like, that are going to not be digested well.
And it's funny that we don't make that connection. Like my girl saw the dog's food, like a piece had fallen into the water and it had puffed up and it looked like awful. And I'm like, yeah, that's what happens inside. Like,
Yeah.
do that with one of those pieces of trick cereal that you want and see what it does.
Right.
It's like,
Right.
it's gross.
It is
Yeah.
gross.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Glorified dog food with coloring.
Yeah. Really. In some cases, I think the dog food might be a better option.
Probably. At least have some protein in it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah. So, I mean, what you eat is definitely going to affect your inflammation. I think that's the bottom line. People need to know that food is sort of the first, first, what's the word I'm looking at? It's not the line of defense, but
Well,
it
that's
is.
what I was thinking too.
Right.
It's first line of defense, but it's the foundation.
Yeah.
Like, it builds your foundation. And then when your foundation starts to crumble, because you haven't done that really good solid stuff, then your house is going to crumble. And this is our house.
Yes. Yeah. And I always tell people like, okay, maybe you are on a medication treating your autoimmune disease or your inflammatory condition. I'm not going to promise that I can get you off the medication, although a lot of people do come to me because they want to get off or they want to avoid medication. So I don't make promises, and that's always a conversation to have with your doctor. But what I will say is that anything you do is going to work better if you are eating a whole foods-based diet, that is an anti-inflammatory approach. And especially if you're eating what I call your best foods, if we know that you have food sensitivities and we can identify those and clear them out, that's even better. That's even more individualized. But anything we can do to limit that inflammation, either with a gluten-free diet, sugar-free diet, all of the above. And sometimes it's not about, what you are eating. It's just about what you aren't eating, right? Like sometimes clearing that stuff out is enough, like your experience where you took out gluten, and that was really awesome. But also, okay, then what are you adding to your diet? I mean, you do have to find that balance. Usually taking something out can be really helpful in the beginning, but then you have to replace it with something just as or more nutrient dense. Don't go replace it with the gluten-free bread.
Right.
Right. Like
Especially
that's not a good
now.
step.
Like when I first started, there wasn't nearly, now basically you can get every single thing you could think of. There's a gluten-free option, and like probably in a restaurant and at the store and at a bakery. Like before I just didn't eat any of that stuff because it wasn't available. So you gotta, you can still, inflame yourself with these gluten-free foods.
Oh, absolutely. Because they're probably loaded with corn and sugar and rice. And those things aren't necessarily bad foods, but when you start eating them and like, 2 or 3 meals a day, you're just not getting the nutrients that you need.
Yeah. And it basically comes down to those the micronutrients, right? All that stuff that's in whole foods that's not in, a bag of gluten-free pretzels.
Yeah. If you look at the ingredients for gluten-free pretzels, you're just not getting a lot. Like the nutrient label just isn't going to give you a lot. And I know when I went gluten-free, I swapped everything for like corn chips and corn tortillas. And, I just sort of made that natural transition to corn, which I am highly, highly sensitive to. I now know, like corn was not my friend. But that was sort of like, well, okay, if I can have corn chips, then it's fine. But yeah, so it's a matter of replacing some of those junk food products with whole food, nutrient dense foods.
Love that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, thinking about inflammation, the first thing that you can do to reduce your inflammation is always diet. I would always start there. There are different ways to go about that. And I'm happy to help. I always tell people, schedule a 15-minute strategy call with me. Start there. We can talk about what you are doing, what your goals are, and what your possible next steps are, because that approach might be different for everybody. But there is a natural solution to your inflammation. And that is going to essentially help reduce your risk of these other diseases.
Which is a win-win.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, gang. Well, that about wraps it up for us. But we will see you back here next time on Get Real with Stacie and Kendra. Have a great day.
Bye, everybody.